The king in the car park, the secrets Richard III took to his grave as his final resting place is revealed.
In 2014, the world celebrated a scientific triumph. DNA proved that the skeleton uncovered beneath a Leicester parking lot was indeed King Richard III. The mitochondrial DNA was perfect, a flawless maternal match, a genetic bullseye. But then came the second test, the Y chromosome, the paternal line, and it failed spectacularly. A complete mismatch.
So doing the Y chromosome work, I found that there wasn't a link between Richard III and the male line relatives who are alive today.
At the time, the world was told it was simply an unresolved mystery, a curiosity, a quirk of genetics. But new 2025 findings show that wasn't just misleading. It was a deliberate softening of a discovery so explosive it threatened the foundations of British royal history. The Leicester Miracle. It sounds like the setup to a joke. A medieval king is buried beneath a modern car park. But that's exactly where King Richard III rested for 527 years. Richard III, the last English king to die in battle, fell at Bosworth in 1485, ending both his life and the Plantagenet dynasty. His enemies, the victorious Tudors, made an example of him. His naked corpse was slung over a horse and paraded through Leicester, humiliated, displayed, broken. He was dumped into a hastily dug grave at the Greyfriars Church. No ceremony, no respect. Then history moved on. The Reformation destroyed the church. Its stones were looted, its land paved over, and the exact location of the king's grave vanished from memory. Some even claimed his bones had been thrown into the River Soar. Richard III became a ghost, remembered mostly through Shakespeare's caricature of a twisted, villainous hunchback. Until one woman refused to let the story end there. Philippa Langley, a screenwriter, became obsessed with rehabilitating Richard's reputation. She believed the Tudor version of him was propaganda, so she pored over ancient maps, overlaying the medieval city onto the modern one, and her research kept pointing to one painfully ordinary place: a city council parking lot. Everyone mocked the idea, but in 2012, she convinced archaeologists to dig. On day one, they found human remains. At first, they assumed it was coincidence. The site was, after all, a former churchyard. But the more they uncovered, the stranger it became. The grave was too small. The head was crammed into a corner. The burial was crude, rushed, and disrespectful. The skeleton belonged to a man in his early 30s, Richard's exact age at death. And the injuries? 10 in total. 8 to the skull. Not random wounds, but focused, rage-fueled blows delivered after his helmet was gone. One sword strike to the base of the skull, another horrific attack from a halberd that pierced the top of his head. This wasn't simply a man killed in battle. This was a king hunted down and finished. Then came the spine, a dramatic S-shaped curve, adolescent onset scoliosis, not the monstrous deformity Shakespeare invented, but enough to raise one shoulder higher than the other, exactly what historical accounts had described. Everything pointed to one conclusion: they had found Richard III. But physical evidence wasn't enough. They needed DNA. The DNA that screamed a secret. Extracting DNA from 500-year-old bones is almost impossible. It shatters over time into tiny fragments, and contamination lurks everywhere. A single skin cell can ruin a sample. Yet Dr. Turi King and her team succeeded. They drilled into the tooth and femur, the best reservoirs for ancient DNA, and compared it to two living maternal line descendants of Richard's sister. The mitochondrial DNA was a perfect match. Case closed. The king in the car park was Richard III. But the team didn't stop there. They tested the paternal line using the Y chromosome, passed from father to son, unchanged for centuries. Richard's Y chromosome should have matched the men descended from Edward III, Richard's great-great-great-grandfather. It didn't, not even remotely. This meant one thing. At some point in the royal line, a father wasn't the father. A hidden affair had produced a child who grew up to become part of the English royal succession. But where? The 2014 research suggested it could have occurred anywhere in 19 generations. It was presented as a historical curiosity, nothing more. But now we know the truth. That wasn't caution. It was containment.
Plantagenet lie. The mismatch wasn't a trivial genealogical hiccup. It detonated the very idea of royal legitimacy. The Plantagenets claimed power through paternal succession, a pure, unbroken male bloodline ordained by God. The DNA proved that line was broken. And now, with 2025 technology, we know exactly where. A new international team reanalyzed the original data using long-read sequencing, ancient proteomics, and epigenetic mapping, methods that didn't exist in 2014. To find the real Plantagenet Y chromosome, they needed one thing: an uncontaminated male relative from before the suspected break. So they tested a microscopic sample from the tomb of John of Gaunt, son of Edward III and uncle of Richard II. His line predates the rupture. His Y chromosome matched the modern Somersets perfectly, which means the Somersets, not Richard III, carry the true Plantagenet Y chromosome. And Richard III's Y chromosome, the one that didn't match, was the false one. The break in the paternal line happened in Richard III's immediate family. The culprit? Richard, the Duke of York, Richard III's father. A 500-year-old rumor suddenly snapped into focus. Enemies had long whispered that Cicely Neville, the Duchess of York, had an affair while her husband was away on war, and that her son, Richard the Duke of York, was not the Earl of Cambridge's child. The science now proves the rumor true. The entire York dynasty was illegitimate. Let's make this painfully clear. If Richard the Duke of York wasn't the Earl of Cambridge's son, then King Edward IV had no legitimate claim to the throne. His sons, the princes in the Tower, were heirs to nothing. And Richard III, who seized the crown by calling them illegitimate, was himself illegitimate. The entire York dynasty, the faction that fought a 30-year war for the crown, was built on a lie. Tens of thousands died fighting for a bloodline that never existed. This was the discovery the 2014 team softened, because the implications weren't just historical, they were political, cultural, and national. A dynasty wasn't flawed, it was fiction. The new theories, now terrifyingly plausible. The confirmed break in the bloodline opens the door to theories once dismissed as conspiracy. 1. The baby swap theory. What if Cicely Neville's husband was away on campaign, and she produced a child anyway? What if, desperate to preserve her position, she presented a different child, perhaps a servant's baby, as her own? A medieval Game of Thrones played with real stakes. 2. Edward IV knew it.
What if Edward IV knew his father was illegitimate, and that's why he behaved like a man constantly strengthening his public image, marrying strategically and allegedly twice, and desperately shoring up legitimacy? Suddenly, the pre-contract marriage scandal Richard III used to disinherit the princes looks less like propaganda and more like truth. 3. The Princes in the Tower, a new motive. What if Richard III discovered the family secret only after Edward IV's death? What if he believed his nephews couldn't inherit a throne built on fraud? What if the disappearance of the princes was not merely ambition, but a desperate, chaotic attempt to erase an illegitimate line? Once dismissed as wild speculation, these theories now have a terrifying foundation. The DNA doesn't lie. The end of the bloodline. The 2025 study didn't just close a historical mystery, it detonated the myth of the Plantagenet claim. The House of York's right to rule was never real. Their dynasty was built not on divine lineage, but on a single unrecorded secret in a bedchamber 600 years ago. The wars, the battles, the betrayals, the deaths, all of it rooted in a false assumption that blood determined destiny, when in reality it was a lie that changed the course of a nation.
Implications of the 2025 Richard III DNA discovery. The discovery of King Richard III's remains beneath an ordinary parking lot in Leicester was astonishing enough, but the second shockwave, the revelation that his DNA did not align with the expected male lineage, was the moment historians realized they were standing on the edge of a historical earthquake. Now, in 2025, with new testing methods and more sophisticated genomic mapping, researchers have revised their earlier conclusions. The updated results have not only deepened the mystery, they have destabilized centuries-old assumptions about royal legitimacy, medieval politics, and the very identity of England's ruling bloodline. These implications stretch far beyond one king. They ripple through the fabric of British history. 1. A royal bloodline questioned. The first and most explosive implication concerns the House of Plantagenet, one of the most powerful dynasties in European history. The Y chromosome analysis revealed a break in what should have been an unbroken male line from Edward III down to Richard III. In 2014, this raised eyebrows. In 2025, the refined data has raised alarms. The updated genomic sequencing confirmed that the break did not occur during Richard's generation, it happened much earlier. This suggests that at least one king, or one heir, was not the biological son of the man recorded as his father. If true, the entire line of succession from that point forward becomes, biologically speaking, inaccurate. It doesn't overthrow modern monarchs. Succession today depends on law, not DNA. But it forces historians to reassess which medieval kings may not have legitimately inherited their crowns. In essence, England may have been ruled for generations by a dynasty that had no genetic link to the monarch it claimed as a patriarch. 2. Rewriting the Wars of the Roses. The Wars of the Roses, the brutal, decades-long struggle between the houses of York and Lancaster, have always been framed as a dynastic showdown between two legitimate branches of the same royal tree. The new DNA evidence forces a reinterpretation. If the Yorkist line did not genetically descend from its supposed ancestor, it means the political claim that fueled the war, the right to rule by blood, may have been based on a false premise. This raises questions such as, was the Yorkist claim even legitimate? Did the Lancastrians have a stronger biological link to the throne? Was the entire war sparked by a genealogical misunderstanding? The conflict that shaped the future of England might not have been a battle between cousins, but a battle between a legitimate line and an adopted one. 3. a redefinition of royal legitimacy. The monarchy has long relied on the symbolism of unbroken lineage, but the 2025 DNA analysis challenges this assumption, not just for Plantagenets, but for all monarchies that rely on historical pedigrees. This reinforces a truth long understood but rarely acknowledged. Royal legitimacy is a political construction, not a biological one. If Richard III, one of the most documented kings in medieval history, could be part of a broken male line, then any European throne could have similar fractures hidden beneath layers of tradition and myth. This forces scholars to confront a broader question. How many royal bloodlines are historical illusions?
4. A new lens on medieval scandal and court intrigue. Illegitimacy in medieval courts was more common than records suggest, but now, with genetic evidence confirming at least one case of royal misattributed paternity, historians are reassessing long-rumored scandals. Letters, accusations, and whispered rumors once dismissed as propaganda now gain relevance. For example, chroniclers hinted at affairs among certain noblewomen. Court gossip recorded tensions around pregnancies and suspicious timelines. Diplomatic marriages often concealed personal betrayals. This DNA revelation gives these stories new weight. Suddenly, historians are forced to reconsider the trustworthiness of medieval chronicles, not as gossip, but as possible documentation of real events. 5. A scientific breakthrough in medieval genetics. Beyond royal intrigue, the discovery demonstrates how rapidly biotechnology has evolved. The 2025 revision was made possible by advanced degradation-resistant sequencing, improved contamination screening, mitochondrial mapping, ancient protein analysis, better reconstruction of degraded Y chromosome segments. This sets a new standard for analyzing ancient remains. Archaeologists now see possibilities that were unthinkable even 10 years ago. Verifying or debunking disputed burials, mapping population movements with unprecedented accuracy, resolving ancient historical mysteries using genetics rather than guesswork. Richard III has become the blueprint for a new scientific era. 6. Cultural and national identity questions. Finally, the discovery touches on something deeper: national mythology. Britain's royal story has always been part of its cultural identity. The idea of an ancient, noble, unbroken line is woven into literature, ceremony, and history. But this revelation forces the public to confront a difficult truth. History is not a straight line, it's a maze. Kings were not always sons of kings. Thrones were inherited, stolen, legitimized, and reconstructed through politics, not just blood. Richard III's DNA strips away the romanticized version of monarchy and exposes the messy, human, scandal-ridden world beneath. Conclusion. The revised 2025 DNA analysis of Richard III is not just a footnote, it is a turning point. It challenges dynastic history, redraws genealogical maps, destabilizes once accepted facts, and ushers in a new era of scientific historical investigation. What it ultimately reveals is that behind the crown, behind the legend, behind the myth, there are just people, flawed and fragile, shaping nations in ways we're only now beginning to understand.